Good morning, I'm Alister, Benn, and welcome to Expressive Photography. You join me here on another gorgeous day on the west coast of Scotland. I'm right out on the very far west coast, not terribly far from home today. Today we're going to celebrate one of our most beautiful attributes here in the west of Scotland. We're surrounded by them where we are. It's almost a rainforest, but it's our birch trees. Today is just the perfect day. The sun is still quite low on the horizon there, maybe a couple of hours after sunrise. And the way the light is skimming over the mountain surface there, these beautiful rock slabs. And in the foreground, we've got some of these beautiful birch. So in today's video, we're going to celebrate the birch tree. And at the end of March, beginning of April, this is the perfect time to see them. Now, as you can see here, the way the light is changing all the time, there's quite a lot of cloud around, and as the clouds are moving, the sun is coming through and it's lighting up the background, it's lighting up the foreground, it's even lighting up the birch trees themselves. But you can definitely see how changeable it is, and this is one of the great things about landscape photography, just that constant change. And in this particular composition, we can see quite a nice foreground with those grasses and then the rocks and then the birch trees and then the mountainside. Now, by the time we crop that down to the beautiful 65 by 24 panoramic aspect ratio, we can just see how strongly the contrasts and layers work in this photograph. I really like this. I really just can't wait to get this back to the computer. Just the light and the variations of light. So yeah, I think taking a slice out of the landscape like this is a really efficient way. Reduce the composition, simplify the scene, get rid of the sky, which is mostly grey cloud at this point in time, and just really distill the landscape down to its finer points. I find this is a very Scottish photograph. When I was driving along the road and saw this first scene presenting itself to me, it really struck me as something that I was very keen to point my camera at. And now looking at the scene on the computer, it's really nice to try to sort of understand what it was about that scene, the landscape that I was driving through, that made me stop the car, get out, set up my tripod and camera and actually start making photographs. As I discussed in the little video there, I did love the kind of layering here. We've got the grasses in the foreground, then some nice rocks, then a big patch of birch trees, and then the very rocky, rugged hillside. Using the right-hand side very much as a kind of terminus, sort of an end point, and allowing that kind of diagonal to fall into the top of the brush there. So one of the things I really like about this shot actually is this diagonal of shadow that's coming up from the bottom left right through the center of the frame, and it actually joins this imaginary diagonal line, follows up the hillside behind the birch trees there. And it's almost as if that diagonal is dictating the aspect ratio. This, of course, is the Xpan 65 by 24 aspect ratio that I shot in camera. This is exactly the composition that I composed at the time. And I really want to stress that I don't overthink these things in the field. It's really just recognizing the transitions that exist between foregrounds, midgrounds and backgrounds, the structures, the textures, the contrasts, and obviously this wonderful rich colour. This was actually taken on quite a cloudy grey morning, and the day just kind of brightened up and the richness of these old grasses from last year's growth is a real feature of the Scottish landscape in the kind of early spring before the new growth starts to come through. So I'm really happy with this photograph. It just seems to sit in the frame nicely, and that big patch of birch there it's not too dominant. There's nothing in the scene that I think is really out of place, and I'm just really, really happy with this one. This was another roadside stop, literally just driving along the road and saw these birches and then the larch and fir trees, I think they are, behind. The larch are very much in their winter coat just now. They will, of course, get green during the summer and they get very yellow in the late autumn. But the position, this is about contrast to my mind. So when I teach luminosity, contrast, colour, atmosphere and geometry, I believe that this photograph has all 5 of those attributes. So we have luminosity of the kind of the dark purple is a sort of luminous, it's kind of subdued, but obviously we have the trunks of the birch trees. And actually the background larch are quite light, so they're creating a kind of feel. So the overall tone of the image is very much a mid-tone image, but the foreground birch are darker. There's some nice shadows in there, and that creates contrast. We also have the contrasts of shape, where we've got the rounded birch crowns in the foreground, juxtaposed against the more jagged, angular fir trees and larches behind. So that's another type of contrast. We have textural contrast, where there's more in the foreground and less in the background. So you actually feel as if there's almost atmosphere in this, and in the areas that almost feel devoid of texture. That is really an atmospheric quality. So again, this is just one that I just feel really sits in the frame, and by condensing the scene with using again this X-pan pano ratio, we're getting rid of all the foreground, which is quite bright grass really, and it just didn't fit structurally with the rest of the frame. I do like how I've managed to isolate this tree, which is almost like got this halo of kind of diffused larch behind it. So again, you know, I'm making photographs that I like, and I think that's really the purpose of being out there, is to see things that we really like and then point our cameras at them. One of the things I really love about photographing close to home is you're always discovering something new. I'm surrounded by forests and obviously the ocean, and it's just so good to come out into a familiar environment and discover something new all the time. One of the things I particularly love about the birch trees is how variable they are. We're just getting to that time of year where they're coming into bud and they turn this really lovely purple colour, especially when they're wet. Now, things have dried out quite a lot this morning, so they're not super purple, but I think I'm capturing some of that. Again, I'm using my Case Revolution polarizer. I find it really helps to cut through the shine, and using again the pano format seems to be a good way of cutting these kind of slices out to the landscape. Because I'm right beside the road here, there's kind of power lines and various little distractions and fences and things like that. So what I'm trying to do is just isolate, again, bits and bits and bits out of the landscape. The thing, again, you know, these birch trees are so variable. I photographed them at various times of the year. Obviously the autumn, they're just resplendent in their fall colour. But at this time, the spring, they really come into this really colourful phase of purpleness, and because everything else is really grey and kind of stripped down, the birch really add this kind of real sense of colour into the landscape, which I'm really loving actually. This again was another roadside stop. I mean, all of these photographs were taken either from the road or only a few meters from the road. And this was where we were having, you know, just underneath all these power lines. And I really see this as a composition of exclusion. I've tried to just get the content without any form of distractions from the content. So anything like the fences that I mentioned or the power lines, and allowing this sort of triangular patch of birch to be the kind of dominant area with these luminous birch trunks here, and then all of this foreground scrub. Some people might think it's messy or cluttered, but there's a very simple structure to it. There's a nice easy flow through the foreground brush that I think juxtaposes quite nicely with the more purple and rich saturated colours in the background. I've left this background area quite shady because shaded areas are always going to create more of a mysterious feel. If everything's very explicit, if we open up all our shadows all the time, then it can be just a little bit too easy for people to make their way through the frame. And leaving them something to have to peer into is a nice little touch. It make the viewers work for it. That's what I've always said. The weather's really started to turn a bit nasty now. Little squalls of rain coming through and so forth. But one of the things, I actually was driving along the road and saw this tree just isolated on its own and decided to stop. And I couldn't stop anywhere close, so I ended up having to walk about half a mile back because I don't like parking in passing spots. But yeah, I've taken a few shots of this composition really, either pano with a bit more foreground trees, and then I moved closer and just did the tree itself. And one of the things that I find striking about this is just it's a lightning bolt of luminosity in a very drab monochromatic world. So, you know, sometimes if you stop at the side of the road or something asks you to stop, sometimes it's just worth stopping. It's really starting to turn a bit nasty now though. Now this was the final scene, and it was really starting to get quite wet by the time I made this photograph. But the reason I stopped was because of these incredible white trunks that really just stood out really sharply against a generally dark background. And how I've processed this really is to emphasize the luminosity, and they're almost like arteries or lungs or, you know, blood vessels, you know, pumping nutrients up into that crown of life, really. So framing them, bookending them with these foreground bushes, I felt was a nice way to kind of just centralize the composition, but I've darkened both the sides with a slight vignette. The vignette isn't really discernible. It's not an obvious vignette, but it is there, and it does slightly darken the edges that allow that middle ground just to kind of stand there on its own. If we look at all four of the photographs, then it's fairly obvious to me that there's a very thematic quality to them. We have four 65 by 24 pano aspect ratios. They definitely feel as if they belong with each other. And for a few hours out in the birch forest, I'm pretty happy with those. I think, yeah. When I set off from home this morning about 10 hours ago, it wasn't my intention to make a video about birch trees. But here we are, you know, all that time later. And the reason I'm sat here in this little birch wood is because I absolutely love birch trees. It's as simple as that. And I think the purpose of this video kind of started out to be a kind of a celebration of these things and my relationship with them perhaps. But what's happened over the last few hours as I've been spending time with them and driving around and finding all sorts of different things to point my camera at and to engage with is it's turned into just a celebration of life, really, that I just, having a camera in your hand and looking at the world and finding something that you're passionate about, finding something that you can get excited about, that's a win, you know. I think it's too easy to come out with expectations and a plan, and that's fine, you know, having a plan and having, you know, something that you've got in your mind that you want to photograph, or a certain scene or certain weather conditions, astrophotography takes a lot of planning. This doesn't. Turning up, being present, being open, just accepting what's there. There's been plenty of rain this morning. I've been, in and out of quite heavy storms, but there's been a character to the whole day. There's been a character to the whole session, really, that I've been out, and it's been changeable and just really incredible. So it's not even about the photographs that I've made, although I'm excited to get back and sort of have a look at the computer and see what it is that I've managed to record on my camera here. But really, if you take one thing away from today's video, that the world is full of incredible things to point cameras at. Absolutely everywhere there's things to point your camera at, but it relies upon you being really passionate about being interested, because if you're not interested in birch trees, it doesn't matter how pretty they are or how luminous they are or how purple they are, or in autumn how beautiful they are with their fall colour. If you're not passionate about them, and you're not passionate about yourself and your relationship with them, then the photographs aren't really going to mean very much. As usual, I hope you enjoy this content. I enjoy making it, and that to me is a win. I really do hope you enjoy it though, and I really hope you take away the message that I'm trying to get across today. If you do, please hit the subscribe button. If you're new to the channel, I hope you like what you see. And if you're an old timer who's been here all these years since I started, then thank you very much for getting to the end of another video. Congratulations. That's it for this week. I'm going to go and spend some more time with trees. Bye for now.